Hello, Year 6, welcome to Friday's Storytime, and we are on chapter 14 of Skycircus. We know where both Robert and Lily are, and where Malkin is, because obviously he was with Lily. But Lily has just managed to open the hatch on the door in room 13 that she's locked in with the other hybrids, and sent Malkin through the door to go and try and find a way to help them escape. So, chapter 14. That afternoon, Robert and the rest of the circus crew returned to the hard work of raising the big top. A crisp wind blew across the site. Over the top of the spiked fence and gate, Robert could make out the crowns of the trees in the Bois de Boulogne. The glimpse of their crinkled leaves shaking somehow gave him hope as he fell into line with Silver and Dimitri and the rest of the crew, who were hauling on pulleys to raise the canvas roof. The red and white striped canvas undulated in the breeze, pulling him and everyone else from side to side, as if it were engaged in a monstrous tug of war against them. Keep the line taut, Silver warned Robert, leaning into him as the rope ran through his fingers. The roustabouts to each side of him kept giving him horrible, disapproving glances. If our side doesn't raise straight, there'll be trouble. Robert gripped the rope tighter, yanking it length by length along with Silver, until his knuckles whitened and the fibers burned sharp against his fingers, and it felt as if all the energy had been sucked from his body. Finally, the roof was raised. "Tie her off!" someone shouted from the far side of the tent, and everyone rushed to knot their length of guy rope onto the nearest stake. After that, there were side holes to add beneath the floating roof, more guys to tighten, and the long strips of walling that had to be sewn together and wrapped around the sides of the tent. Robert looked for the section of canvas he'd cut through yesterday with his knife, but he couldn't see it. Someone had repaired it already. As he followed Dimitri and Silver around, learning each job, he made sure to glance about for Lily and Malcolm, but there was no sign of them, or any of the other hybrids from room 13. Other times he checked to see if the cargo bay door was open, so he could find his clothes and things. It never was. And he was unsure what he could do about either of those problems without using up his last chance and bringing more trouble down on himself. The final job of the day, once the tent was up, was adding the banners and bunting to decorate it. While everyone was busy with this, the gates in the fence opened and a long black steam wagon pulled through and parked just a few feet from the edge of the tent where Robert was standing. Joey, in a scruffy suit, jumped down from the steering compartment and closed and locked the gates behind him, as Augie ran around the edge of the tent to meet him. "Where'd you get that Weemstaggin?" Augie called. Joey said something indistinguishable in reply. Robert stopped what he was doing, looked around to check he wasn't being watched, and stole a little closer to them, so he could overhear the rest of what they were saying. While he listened, he kept behind the curve of the tent, out of their sight line. Augie was pointing at the steam wagon. "Looks like a hearse." "It is," Joey said. "Madame has bought some new device for the evening show on Sunday, to put Miss Hartman in, or Miss Valentine, I should say. They've added her to the posters. Made her look quite pretty. They're arriving later, and we're to go into Paris to plaster them around the city." "Poor mindless errands," Augie complained. "And what's this device?" he asked. "I mean, what's this device?" "I'm not a boffin," Joey said, "but I think it's some kind of electric coffin." Robert tensed, his pulse throbbing in his chest. He had to keep his head. He tried hard not to let this news fester and listened instead to the rest of what was being discussed. "The doctor who's making it's not quite done." Joey slapped the roof of the parked steam hearse. "But we're to collect it tomorrow in this, and Madame will come." So that was their scheme. They were going to put Lily in some coffin machine and display her in the show on Saturday night, which was only 2 days away. He needed to tell her as soon as possible. Their escape plan had to be ready to go before those 2 days were out. Otherwise, whatever terrible fate Slimwood and Verdigris had lined up for Lily might come to pass, and that didn't bear thinking about. Robert crept back to Dimitri and Silver, who were hooking up the last roll of bunting. There, Dimitri said, tying it off. Done and dusted. The light was fading fast. The whistle blew for dinner. As they lined up with the rest of the crew to go in for the night, Robert told Silver and Dimitri what he'd overheard the clown saying. Doesn't sound good for your friend, Silver said softly. We have to get a message to her right now. Robert wiped his clammy hands on his work clothes. The queue had started to shuffle in through the side door of the skyship. We can sneak off when we go inside. Silver shook her head. They'll see us. And you've only one strike left. Besides, you won't be able to get to their door. There's a padlocked gate in the way. The first of the circus folk had reached the door hatch and were being counted into the gondola by Slimwood, who ticked them off on a numbered list. Soon they were at the front of the line and bundled inside along with everyone else, up the stairs to the mess hall, and it was too late to come up with any kind of plan. At dinner, Robert sat at table 6 with Dimitri and the Buttons once again. The meal was more gruel. He could barely keep it down. He kept coming back to the mysterious fate that awaited Lily in the show in 2 days' time. He needed to get a message to her about it as soon as possible, and he'd no idea how. Just as Robert was thinking this, a red shape streaked from the shadows of the doorway to under their table, and a moment later, a snouty face appeared between his legs. Malkin, Robert whispered in delight, his heart soaring with relief at the sight of his old friend. He tried not to make it obvious to those around him that he was looking down. He threw a quick glance at them, but they were too busy chatting amongst themselves. Only Silver noticed. Who are you talking to? She asked. No one, Robert blustered. But she had felt the fox brush against her leg under the table, and when she peered down, she saw him. If she was shocked to spy a talking fox under the dinner table, it didn't show in her poker face. Don't worry, she said. I'll keep your secret. Just raise your head like you're talking to me. Then no one will notice. Robert nodded. With his eyes on Silver, he tried to converse with Malcolm under the table, aiming his words down. It was more difficult than it looked. How did you get out? He asked the fox softly. Lily managed to open a hatch in the door of room 13, Malcolm explained. How is Lily? Robert asked, through the side of his mouth. Moaning about everything as usual. Robert was relieved to hear one of the fox's barbed comments for once. He couldn't resist a peek at him. Malcolm's toothy smile widened into a lopsided grin. Look at me, Silver told him again. You need to be quick now. She was right. The lunk was patrolling the room, and at any moment he might register what was going on. In whispered murmurs, Robert told Malkin about the conversation he'd overheard between Oggy and Joey, and how Madame was planning to put Lily into some sort of coffin-like machine made by a doctor that was being delivered tomorrow night. It doesn't give us much time, Malcolm said in a hushed voice. We have to try and get out tonight. Lily needs the lockpicks. You'll have to give them to me. Robert gave a dry gulp at the back of his throat. I can't. They're lost. What? That one word was shaded with disappointment. Did someone take them? Malcolm asked. No. Robert bit his lip. They're in my other clothes, in a laundry bag in the cargo bay. Then I can get them, Malcolm said. Robert shook his head. You won't be able to. They locked all the doors for the night when they brought everyone in from putting the tent up. Oh. Malcolm's whiskers drooped in despair. Don't worry, Robert added. I'll get the pics back tomorrow. Silver and Dimitri will help me. Silver nodded. Tell Lily we'll find them for her, she said. When? How? Malcolm asked. We don't know yet, Robert said, but we'll think of something. Everyone had finished eating by this time, and a whistle rang out. You'd better scarp her, Silver whispered to the fox, before the lump starts taking people to the cell corridor, and you won't be able to get back. Good luck, Robert muttered. He watched as Malcolm disappeared under the table and sneaked out of the mess hall while no one was looking. He hoped the mech fox would get back to room 13 okay. He imagined Lily would be disappointed when she got his message and no lockpicks. He'd need to get them for her tomorrow because time was running out. He wondered if Tolly had got back home to John and explained what had happened. But there wouldn't be time to wait for rescue. Not since things had begun to move so fast. No. He, Lily and Malkin would have to escape from this place by tomorrow night, and that wasn't going to be easy. even if he managed to recover the lockpicks. When he looked up again, he saw that theirs was the last table of circus folk left in the room. There were solely roustabouts in the canteen now. They all leered at him, and it was only then that he realised he'd no idea where he was going to sleep. "Don't let them put me in with anybody back," he mumbled to Silver and Dimitri. "That's all right," Silver said. "You can come with us. We have space in cabin 6. When the lump comes to get us, just follow along." Robert felt relieved to have found a friendly family in this horrible place. It made him remember his ma and sister who'd given him the moon locket that Slimwood had taken. They were show people too, and just like the Buttons, they were kind folk who had become lost in a bad place for a while. The Lunk had returned to collect them. Robert did as Silver suggested, standing up with the Button family and Dimitri and losing himself in the middle of the group as they were marched from the mess hall. Robert tried hard to remember the way as the Lunk led the family down the stairwell and along a passage of cabins to somewhere deep within the sky ship. Finally, the mechanical man opened room 6 and the Buttons and Dimitri stepped inside. Robert was the last in, and with a clunk, the Lunk slammed the door behind him and locked it. As soon as he was gone, the Buttons busied themselves getting ready for bed. There were only 4 berths in the room, and each one was taken already, but Dimitri went to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a hammock for Robert, and the rest of the family helped him string it across the centre of the cabin. When they were finished, he climbed up into the hammock and settled himself on his back. Its dusty sides gathered in around him, holding him tight in its grip. Every time he shifted, it would rock back and forth ever so slightly. It felt strange, but not uncomfortable, like being the pendulum of a clock, or lying in a cradle floating on the ocean. He listened to the sleep sounds the Buttons made, Bruno Button's snores, and Gilda Button's wheezing, and wondered if Lily had found a proper bed, with a proper pillow. Most of all, he hoped Malkin would get his message to her. Tomorrow, he, Robert, would find the lockpicks, and the 3 of them would make a plan to get out of this terrible place before it was too late. He'd need his wits about him for that, so he should probably try to get some rest. He closed his eyes, and his breathing softened as he gradually drifted off into strange and troubled dreams. Right, well, thank you again for joining me. I hope you're enjoying the book. I am really enjoying reading it to you each day. On Monday, we will come back for chapter 15, and we'll have to see whether Robert's plan comes to fruition.